When the world learned of Pope Francis's passing, a quiet stillness settled across cities and villages alike. From grand cathedrals to humble homes, people paused, mourning a man whose voice had reached hearts in ways few ever could. In the days that followed, the Vatican made an unusual request, a global invitation for people to write letters, sharing how the Pope had touched their lives. They would not be stored away, but read aloud, broadcasted to the world as a tribute to his legacy. The call for letters spread like wildfire across social media, in churches, mosques, temples, and even schools. No matter one's faith or background, everyone was welcome to write. Among those who heard the call were 5 very different people, scattered across the world, yet bound by an invisible thread. Each would soon find that their story, once private, now had a place in something much bigger. In Rome, a young woman named Sophia sat in her tiny apartment, the news still fresh on her screen. Her mind raced back to the day she saw Pope Francis bless the homeless at the train station, just blocks from where she grew up. Far away in Brazil, Raphael, a prisoner with a hardened heart, stared at the ceiling of his cell, remembering a letter from the Pope he once read, urging forgiveness. In Nigeria, Amina, a nurse, thought of the Pope's visits to the sick and how his words gave her strength during dark times. In London, Thomas, an atheist climate activist, wrestled with emotions he didn't yet understand. And in the Philippines, Father Miguel, an aging priest, felt called to write the final chapter of his own long journey of faith. They didn't know it yet, but their letters would change them and the world. Sophia had never considered herself religious. Raised in a secular household in Rome, faith was something she admired from a distance but never embraced. Her life revolved around her work as a photographer, capturing street scenes and the raw emotions of daily life. But there was one day, years ago, when her camera caught more than just an image. It captured a moment that would stay with her forever. She had been walking near the Termini train station, a part of the city many avoided. There, among the forgotten, Pope Francis stood quietly, without fanfare. He knelt beside an old man, barefoot, and kissed his weathered hand. The cameras weren't there except for Sophia's. She didn't snap the photo right away. She watched, frozen, as the Pope whispered something to the man, who began to weep. Sophia lowered her camera, realizing that some moments were meant to be felt, not captured. Now, years later, sitting in her apartment, Sophia wondered why that moment had never left her. She had seen leaders, politicians, and celebrities, but none had seemed so present, so human. Pope Francis had taught her something about dignity, about seeing people who were invisible to most. She reached for her pen, hesitating only briefly before she began her letter.
Dear Pope Francis, you didn't know me, and I never knew you. But the day I saw you kneel before a forgotten man, you reminded me to look with my heart, not just my eyes. That moment made me believe in something greater than myself. Thank you for showing me that love needs no words, only action.
In the humid heat of a Brazilian prison, Raphael sat alone in his cell, the walls closing in like they always did. He had been behind bars for 8 years now, convicted of robbery and assault. Anger had once been his closest companion, burning hotter than the sun above. Forgiveness? It was a word for weak men, he used to think. He had been forgotten by the world, and he liked it that way, until the letter came. 2 years earlier, a chaplain had handed him a small note. It was a printed message from Pope Francis addressed to prisoners everywhere. Raphael almost tore it up, but curiosity stopped him. The words were simple. God never tires of forgiving us. We are the ones who tire of seeking his mercy. He had read it over and over that night, unable to sleep. For the first time, he wondered, could someone like him ever be forgiven? Thought stayed with him, quietly gnawing at the edges of his anger. Over time, he found himself helping other inmates, listening instead of lashing out, even praying in secret. It was not a perfect change, but it was real. Now, with the news of Pope Francis's death, Raphael felt something break inside him. He owed that man a part of his soul, and he needed to say it.
Dear Pope Francis, I am a man in chains, but you made me believe I could be free inside. I thought mercy was for others, not for men like me. Your words made me see my life wasn't over, that I could be more than my past. Thank you for seeing us, the forgotten, the condemned. You gave me hope, and I will never forget.
In the bustling city of Abuja, Nigeria, Amina walked through the hospital corridors like she always did, focused, calm, but tired. The pandemic had left scars no one could see. She had lost colleagues, patients, and even her mother. Yet every morning she returned, wearing her nurse's uniform like armor. Faith had always been her guide. As a Muslim, she found strength in prayer, but sometimes even the strongest need reminding they are not alone. During the height of the pandemic, she had seen a video clip that stayed with her. Pope Francis stood in an empty St. Peter's Square, rain falling as he prayed for the world. Alone, yet carrying everyone's pain. His words had transcended faith. We are all in the same boat. Amina had felt it then, that despite differences in belief, compassion had no borders. She began to follow his messages, drawn by his humanity. He spoke of caring for the sick, of honoring those who served without recognition. It made her feel seen. In a world where religion sometimes divided, this man built bridges with his heart. She heard of his passing. A deep sorrow filled her, as if she had lost a friend she'd never met. Sitting at the edge of her bed after a long shift, Amina wrote her letter, her hands still sore from work.
Dear Pope Francis, I am not a Christian, but your voice reached me when I was breaking. In you, I saw a leader who spoke for us all, the healers, the tired, the ones left to hold the world together. You reminded me that God's love is bigger than we know, and kindness is the highest faith. Thank you for standing in the rain for us.
She closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. In a small flat in London, Thomas stared out at the grey sky, his mind a storm of questions. He had never believed in God, not really. Raised in a home where science ruled and religion was seen as a relic, Thomas had grown into a passionate climate activist. He fought for the earth, for justice, for change. But faith? That was something he didn't need, or so he thought. And yet, Pope Francis had always unsettled him. Laudato Si', the Pope's encyclical on the environment, had shaken something in him. Here was a man of faith, one who spoke with urgency about the same earth Thomas fought to protect. The earth, our common home, is crying out, the Pope had written. Thomas couldn't ignore it. He had printed that line, pinned it above his desk, never admitting to anyone where it came from. Now, the news of Pope Francis's death filled his feed, and unexpectedly, Thomas felt a heaviness. He had disagreed with many religious leaders, but never with this one. The Pope had been different, not because of doctrine, but because of action. He didn't just preach, he lived his values. And in that, Thomas saw something true. He sat down, unsure if a letter would matter, but the words came anyway.
Dear Pope Francis, I didn't believe in God, and maybe I still don't, but I believed you. I believed you when you said the earth needs us all. You spoke to us not as a preacher, but as a fellow human, begging us to care. You showed me that faith can serve life, not just religion. Thank you for standing with us, for believing the world could change.
In a quiet village in the Philippines, Father Miguel sat alone in the chapel he had served for over 40 years. The wooden pews were empty, the candles flickering softly. His hands, once steady with youth, now trembled slightly as he held the rosary. The news of Pope Francis's passing had struck him more deeply than he expected. They had never met, but Father Miguel felt as though he had lost a brother, perhaps even a guide. In his early years as a priest, Miguel had been firm, traditional, and proud. He believed his duty was to uphold rules, to be the strong shepherd of his flock. But over time, as the world changed, he began to doubt. He had seen the pain of poverty, the confusion of the young, and the loneliness of the old. The answers he once gave felt too simple. He began to question whether he was truly reaching the hearts of his people. Then Pope Francis came, speaking not of rules first, but of mercy, of listening, of walking with the broken. His words softened Father Miguel's heart. Slowly he began to change. He visited the sick more often. He welcomed those who had left the church, and he learned to listen before speaking. Pope Francis had given him permission to be human, not just holy. Now, with the Pope gone, Father Miguel felt called to write.
Dear Pope Francis, in my youth, I believed strength meant certainty. But you taught me that strength can be gentle, that mercy is the heart of God. You helped me find my people again. Not through power, but through love. In your silence now, I hear a call to continue what you began. Thank you for showing me the way home.
The old priest placed the letter on the altar, his heart full of peace. As the letters arrived at the Vatican, they came in thousands. Folded papers, emails, handwritten notes in every language. Volunteers worked tirelessly to read and sort them, their hearts touched by the stories pouring in. Among the sea of voices, 5 letters stood out, each marked with a quiet power that echoed the Pope's own spirit. The decision was made. These 5 would be shared with the world as a living testament to his legacy. An invitation was sent to Sophia, Raphael, Amina, Thomas, and Father Miguel. Each was asked to come to Rome to be part of a memorial where their letters would be read aloud. None of them had ever dreamed of such a thing. Hesitation, fear, and awe filled them as they prepared to travel. They didn't know one another, yet something pulled them forward, a need to honor the man who had unknowingly connected them. When they arrived, Rome was alive with grief and reverence. Pilgrims from every corner of the earth filled the streets, lighting candles, praying, singing. At the heart of it all stood St. Peter's Basilica, towering yet humble in its welcome. As the five strangers met for the first time in a quiet hall, there was a sense of recognition, not of faces but of souls. They shared stories, laughter, and tears. Though their paths were different, the Pope's light had touched them in the same way. He had seen them, each in their own struggle, and called them to something greater. They were not just writers of letters, they were now carriers of his message. As the sun set over the Vatican, the five stood together, ready to let their words fly into the world like seeds, knowing that love never truly dies. It only grows. The grand hall was silent as the crowd gathered, not in mourning, but in reflection. It was not a time for speeches or doctrine, but for stories, real, raw, and rooted in love. Sophia sat with her hands clasped tightly, her heart racing as her name was called first. Slowly she stepped forward, the light warm on her face, and unfolded her letter. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steady. As she spoke of seeing Pope Francis with the homeless man, eyes around the room filled with tears. She finished. Love needs no words, only action. The hall was still, but in that silence was deep understanding. Sophia stepped back, feeling as if the moment had set her free. Next was Raphael. Clad in simple clothes, he stood tall despite the fear inside him. A man once imprisoned by hate now shared his truth. I am a man in chains, but you made me believe I could be free inside. His words, honest and bare, reached into the hearts of those listening. He spoke not just for himself, but for all who had fallen and longed to rise again. One by one, Amina, Thomas, and Father Miguel read their letters. Amina's voice brought hope to weary souls. Thomas's doubts became bridges to belief, and Father Miguel's gentle wisdom wrapped the room in peace. Each letter was a flame, lighting the path Pope Francis had walked, a path of mercy, unity, and courage. When they finished, no applause was needed. Instead, the crowd stood in quiet respect, as if holding the memory of the Pope like a sacred flame. The letters had done more than honor a man. They had reminded the world that in every heart, no matter how distant, love still lives. After the letters were read, the five stood together, surrounded by strangers who no longer felt like strangers. People approached them quietly, thanking, hugging, sharing their own stories of how Pope Francis had touched their lives. It was as if a spark had passed through the crowd, igniting a shared sense of purpose. The Pope's death had not ended his work, it had only passed it on. Sophia found herself being asked to photograph memorials across the city. She agreed, but with a new eye. Not just for beauty, but for truth. She planned an exhibition to show the hidden faces of compassion she had once overlooked. Raphael was offered a chance to speak in prisons, to help others believe they too could change. He accepted, knowing his past could be a light in dark places. Amina returned to Nigeria, where her hospital named a new ward after Pope Francis, a place for healing, not just of the body, but the spirit. She began to lead interfaith efforts, uniting healers of all beliefs to serve together. Thomas, though still unsure of faith, started a foundation for climate action inspired by the Pope's words. "The earth is our common home," he told others, now with a conviction that surprised even him. And Father Miguel, with renewed strength, wrote a book about mercy, filled with stories from his village and the wisdom of a lifetime. It was read by many, even beyond his faith, and in his final years, he found joy in knowing he had helped keep the flame alive. The letters had done more than honor a man. They had become living acts of love, spreading across the world like seeds on the wind. Pope Francis had always believed in the power of small acts, and now, through these 5 lives, his message continued to grow. Months passed, and the world slowly moved forward, as it always does. Yet something had shifted, subtle but present. The letters to Pope Francis had been published in many languages, read in schools, in churches, in homes. People from all corners of the earth found pieces of themselves in the words of Sophia, Raphael, Amina, Thomas, and Father Miguel. They saw that love, mercy, and hope were not bound by faith or nation, but lived in the hearts of all. In Rome, a small plaque was placed near St. Peter's Basilica. It read, "Build bridges, not walls." Below it, an invitation, "Write your letter, share your light," and so they did. Letters continued to pour in, not to mourn, but to celebrate, to promise, to carry forward the vision of a world where compassion ruled over fear. The memory of Pope Francis had become more than history. It was now a movement, alive and breathing in every act of kindness. Pope Francis was gone, but his legacy had found new voices, and the bridges they built would stand for generations.